isn't about toughness for toughness' sake. It's about learning how to stay regulated, connected, and effective when things get hard together. On this episode of the Flourish Feed podcast, I'm joined by Mark Gasparotto to explore what grit really is, why shared struggle forces trust faster than comfort ever could, and how resilience can be trained at every chapter of life. From eating the same dirt to solving problems under pressure, this conversation reveals why together, under stress, is where our greatest human capacity can be unlocked. But first, let's get to know Mark a little bit. Mark Gasparotto is a Canadian Armed Forces veteran, resilience trainer, and founder of immersive, field-based programs that help individuals and teams build capacity under pressure. Drawing on decades of military experience, expedition leadership, and entrepreneurial work, Mark specializes in teaching grit as a trainable skill, not a personality trait. He is the creator of Outside the Wire, a program designed to place people in controlled, high-stress environments where cognitive clarity, physical effort, breath control, and team regulation have to work together to solve real-world problems. Mark is also deeply involved with Wounded Warriors Canada, supporting veterans and first responders in rebuilding resilience, trust, and identity after trauma. Mark's work is grounded in a simple truth. Resilience is forged through shared challenge. When teams eat the same dirt, regulate together, and stay connected under stress, they discover that they are capable of far more together than they ever imagined alone. Mark Gasparotto, welcome to the Flourish Feed podcast.
Jillian, thank you very much. And that was a great introduction. In fact, I may steal it for my own branding.
Fantastic. You're welcome to it. Now, you've said, as I mentioned in the intro, struggle is not something to avoid. It's something to practice. What does grit mean to you? Beyond the nature of the word as a buzzword, what does it actually mean?
So I don't often use the word grit because I think it's got a connotation and it always requires an explanation. And so I really just talk about resilience. And if people want to use resilience and grit interchangeably, that's probably fine. There's some myths to dispel, without a doubt. While we are born with certain personality traits that can be helpful for resilience, so if you're more naturally optimistic, if you more naturally practice gratitude and are curious, like those things are helpful, but they can be trained as well. Curiosity, perhaps less so, but the other ones, you can fake it if you really want to. So resilience, not an innate skill, can be learned, practiced, and then, really forged in adversity. And if you can do it within a team context, even better. So yes, there is individual resilience and there is team resilience, and those are actually different things, but they are connected. And so much of our resilience, and in fact, studies will show this, the number one factor for people's resilience, and in fact, longevity, and in fact, happiness really comes down to the quality of those people's relationships. So if you can chew the same dirt,
Amen.
it really does forge the bonds of human connection, community. And I don't think anything builds trust like it. And what we know from other studies and, the work that Stephen Covey's done, and even my own experiences in the Army, trust is the number one factor for team resilience. So I've thrown a lot of things together there.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
And hopefully I've answered the initial.
You definitely did. Now, when you're in the military, I imagine, especially as you move up into positions of leadership, you see all types coming. They're not coming in on a standard format. They're coming in from different parts of the country. They're coming in with different backgrounds. How did your military career shape your understanding of resilience and personal capacity? And how many different kind of forms can you work with in order to build the resilience of others? Because you're talking about it at a personal level, but you're also talking about it in life or death situations as a team. So tell us a little bit more about that military definition and what that looks like as far as developing humans around you.
Well, perhaps what I'll do is I'll just start with a definition then. And this is largely drawn from how the Canadian Forces, or the Canadian Armed Forces defines it, I think, with just some wordsmithing. So the definition that I use is it's the ability to withstand, adapt to, recover from, and even get stronger in the face of adversity. So there's 4 verbs in there: withstand, adapt, recover, stronger. Those require increasing levels of effort to achieve, but they really are all achievable. And getting stronger in the face of adversity really links to the work that Nassim Taleb did when he wrote his book Anti-Fragile. So think gain from disorder. I guess by the knowing smile, you're familiar with his work. He also wrote The Black Swan. Super interesting guy. Some of his stuff I don't exactly understand, but the key message, because he does get quite esoteric
Yes.
at times. But you can become stronger as a result of adversity. If I think of my own experiences, certainly coming home from war, ultimately you can own the experience or it can own you. And that will take some time. It may even take some professional help, but suffering is a choice. And so if you're familiar with Viktor Frankl's work, Man's Search for Meaning, which was probably the most impactful book I read, certainly my recovery from my wartime experiences. And I was just recently introduced to the Buddhist concept of dukkha, which is all about suffering as a choice. And it's when you're experiencing something, but you want to be somewhere else. You have a yearning or desire to either not feel, detach yourself from reality, or be somewhere else. So I've really learned to be present in the moment. I've really learned to own the experience and then ultimately to become a better person for it. So that's quite spiritual and
Hmm.
metaphysical, if you will, but that's for me been tremendously helpful in terms of resilience. I think, okay, so getting back to earlier on when you said, from a military perspective, we bring people in from all walks of life, from all parts of the country. I mean, those demographics have changed over time. It used to be, uh, mostly white, European background, or maybe East Coast because of socioeconomic reasons, and people joined the military. And there was a rural aspect, so people were farmers and hunters and were used to being outdoors. That's really not the case anymore. Yeah, we still
Interesting.
get a few of those folks, but by and large, Canada is an urban nation, and so we're getting folks in who probably don't have the same life experiences that soldiers once upon a time joined with, and it does play out in terms of the need to train them to operate in the field, but also to undergo some hardship.
I agree with you. We
Yeah.
we we seem to live, I think, too, in a moment when I don't know if it's what technology has done or if it was COVID or parenting style, but there's been this perception that friction and growth being painful is something to be avoided. That things should be easy and things should be let's make life easier for our kids. Like let's make things so that they don't have to struggle as much. And yet we know, like at the level of biology, the only reason a muscle gets bigger is because you tear it down a bit and
Yes.
it rebuilds itself back. So I know there's an absolutely biological foundation to what it is that you're talking about. But when you look around in the world that is contributing people to the military from all of these various backgrounds, but also at a time when friction is seen as something to be avoided. Why friction and why not comfort? What's the on the ground reason, boots on the ground reason why friction is more important than comfort in order to not just function in the military but also function in the world? You probably see a lot of overlap in the consulting work you do now too.
There is no growth in comfort. There is only growth in struggle. And so I mentioned Viktor Frankl earlier, and really he talked about suffering, but he also was able to survive 4 different Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. So I don't advocate for suffering, and actually neither did Frankl. He said unnecessary suffering is foolish. It's only when you have no choice in the matter.
Mm,
And when you have no choice in the matter, then you just need to be highly realistic about the situation you're in. He said if you can't change the situation, then you're forced to change yourself. Okay, so if we dial that back a bit between, comfort and struggle, it's in struggle, life struggle, that's where the growth lies. And so friction is important. And when we remove all friction, well, just like if bones aren't under pressure, they don't grow. Right. So that's the Nassim Taleb talks about that
anti-fragile.
as an analogy or a metaphor um, for things that gain from stress.
Yes.
And so if you're going to become resilient, you have to do hard things. That's my number one rule, right? You can't click your way to resilience in an online course or However, there's an important caveat. Before doing whatever hard thing, it really is beneficial to get the skills and knowledge first. So to go through that information and then apply it in a very contextual manner. Because if you jump into the deep end, odds are you're going to get suboptimal results or perhaps even catastrophic failure. So there is a theoretical portion, a conceptual portion to resilience. And then you got to apply it and you got to do hard things. You got to do the hard things physically.
Mm-hmm.
And most people start there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something called the cross-stressor adaptation hypothesis, which just says if you do something hard in one area of your life, it allows you to do something hard in another, right? So there's some transference
I'm so
of
glad there's a term for that. I feel like I've been doing that
right.
intuitively for
Yeah,
so long. What was the term again?
cross-stressor adaptation hypothesis.
Fantastic.
So they haven't proven it, but there's a theory, there's a correlation between doing that. So you go to the gym, you work out physically, and that hypothesis will say that, well, that gives you a little bit of resilience, perhaps emotionally at home with the kids or mentally at work, within a professional setting.
It's
So
interesting.
now I'm just talking about different legs of the table.
Yeah.
So the analogy I use for resilience is a four-legged table where the legs are body, mind, heart, and soul, or the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And spiritual can be religion. I'm not a religious man. So for me, it's more about purpose. And I probably gravitate more towards the Eastern, the Buddhist concepts there. And the tabletop are your relationships or your social network. And I alluded to that before and how important chewing the same dirt with people you care about it and how that's all linked. So those are all elements of your humanity and they all play a part in how resilient you are. So if you were to load up a table with a lot of weight, right, put it under stress, it would need four strong legs and a top. Well, your personal resilience is no different. You really need to work on all elements of your humanity, and some may be stronger than others, and that's okay up to a point. But you get put under enough stress. If you haven't worked on all of those things, then you will stumble.
One of those legs is going to bust out, right?
That's correct.
I want to come back to the two things that you've been talking about. The first is a Viktor Frankl reference, and the second one has to do with what I'm going to come back to and tag for myself as psychological safety under pressure. But the Viktor Frankl thing, you said, why would you put, I mean, it was misquoting, I'm kind of paraphrasing here about you don't put yourself unnecessarily under struggle or stress. It's only that it needs to be there, when is absolutely necessary. And yet here we are, 21st century, totally different time than when Victor lived. And I feel like maybe even hidden underneath the surface, we are living amongst certain factors or features of the universe, right? Technology probably being one of the most powerful, where if we're not training every day, we're up against a machine that is operating so fast and so a massive tidal force in our face all the time. I wonder if exposing ourselves to struggle intentionally has become more important because of the world that we live in. Have you given any thought to maybe the Frankl quote needing to be updated in the sense that today's world's a little different than his world was?
Well, he talked about suffering.
Okay,
And I do make a distinction between struggle and suffering.
good point.
Now, that said, a little bit of suffering is also not a bad thing. And so this is where, I guess, the nuance. So we know from many studies that to build up resilience, it's all about inoculation to stress. That starts with manageable stressors. So, right, you don't want to kill the client, you don't want to kill the patient. And just like in the gym, yes, sometimes you want to go to failure, but you don't want to go until, you need surgery.
Right.
And so there's a point at which a training scar is not helpful because it actually weakens you. So how do you build up just like a vaccine works?
Right. I
Right?
literally use the
Inoculation.
word dosing, right? How
Yeah,
do you use the right dose?
correct. Because that allows you to do something harder and then harder and harder. But just like endurance, athletes, they will not ramp up their volume by more than, 5 or 10% in any given year. It really does need to be, a gradual uh, inculcation uh, if you want to perform at optimal levels.
And if you're trying for struggle, you're not aiming for suffering. You're not aiming for suffering. You're aiming for struggle so that you could endure suffering if it was thrown at you. Is that kind of a better way of saying it?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable nuance.
Okay, excellent. Now, the next question I had when you were talking about working together in groups and as a team, knowing that you've all dosed struggle to get to that place where you're now hopefully on the same page and maybe a level playing field with each other, but now you're facing some kind of influence or challenge where psychological safety might be in question. How do you operate as a team when the psychological safety is no longer there? Because I think that's you said trust earlier, right? That's
Yes.
another way of saying trust. How do you create that trust and psychological safety in a moment or in a circumstance when the external forces are no longer psychologically safe for you? How do you do that?
So there's a few parts to your question there. So how you work internally with psychological safety um, may be different than how that team then operates externally within the market, where there could be some vicious competition.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. I commanded a combat engineer squadron in Kandahar, and we were there during a particularly violent phase of the war. And I just, by sheer luck of timing, I was there and part of a larger Canadian battle group, and we had to face a massive Taliban force. So it was the largest combat operation in the Canadian Army since Korea. And in fact, it was the largest combat operation in NATO's history up until that point. And I certainly like to think that within the squadron, because we were exceedingly entrepreneurial, we were problem solvers. We didn't have all the equipment we needed, so we ended up renting some and, welding on armor, like steel to the cabs of rented dozers. So we were taking great risks, and we were doing that because we had entrepreneurial spirit, and that requires psychological safety to bring up crazy ideas and also to fail. And certainly if things failed, not because someone was lazy and didn't put in the reps, didn't do their homework, didn't do all the preparations. I mean, that's a disciplinary issue in my mind. It's a performance issue. But if your innovation requires trial and error, and so sometimes error means that you're going to fail. So I think within my squadron, we had the psychological safety to do those things. So internally, we operated in a very progressive manner.
Mm,
I've been called the fuck you version of Brene Brown, if
nice.
you will.
Yep.
Okay. So, if that's a good reference point for your audience, but that's how we operated it internally. But externally, in the marketplace and on the battlefield, which is really a marketplace of violence, we prosecuted combat operations with extreme violence against the enemy. So there was a duality there.
Hmm.
So I think hopefully without going down too deep a rabbit hole in terms of
This is a good
Kandahar,
rabbit hole. You keep going.
that answers the question around how do you have psychological safety on a team when the environment doesn't allow for it necessarily. Well, not that it doesn't allow for it, but it's exceedingly chaotic
Yes.
and vicious. Okay, so that's that. Psychological safety is not the exact same as trust, but it's connected.
Mm.
And interestingly, Google did a study, I think called Project Aristotle. They wanted to know what was a key factor for high performance within their teams. And Google's got the data; they've got it on all of us,
They
and
have
certainly they had
all
it
the data. Yeah.
on their employees. And what they found was the number one factor was psychological safety
Hmm.
that allowed for those teams to be high performance. That is an element of trust. Yeah, I think it was Brene Brown's work around vulnerability. Vulnerability precedes trust, right? It's the foundation. And so when you can demonstrate some vulnerability, and for me, vulnerability, like I'm an army guy, right? So it's not about leaking your emotions, right? I only cry in the shower, so
Hmm.
no one can see, and
Safe.
right,
Yeah.
it takes care of itself.
Yeah.
So to me, vulnerability is just being human, saying stuff like, I don't know, I need your help. That's a better idea. We're going to go with it. Or I got that wrong and I'm sorry. To me, that's just what it is. And when you demonstrate some vulnerability, especially as a leader, and that's another leadership myth that, we, for whatever reason, would have all the answers. Like that's just crazy. So when you demonstrate vulnerability and then someone reciprocates it, So they see it, they acknowledge it, they reciprocate it, then there's a vulnerability loop. I
Yes.
didn't come up with that term. Can't remember who did. And then trust gets built on top of that.
Very nice. And that's what can happen in that entrepreneurial moment when you're putting metal on the side of the tractor or whatever it is you used. But that vulnerability has to disappear once you enter the market, once you enter the field. Is that safe to say that that's where the trust is built, is here, and then it's used?
Yes.
Yeah,
So hopefully that links together
definitely.
the various aspects of the question.
I like that. And I like that you're breaking down now how resilience at a team level is a connection of various people who've done struggle work to prepare for suffering, but they've also done vulnerability, trust work as a group in the face of adversity to be creative and entrepreneurial in their inventions to make it out the other side in order to operate as a resilient team. And I love that you use the terms like reps and field and chaos and vicious, because those terms are relevant in every place. They're not just relevant in the gym or on the battlefield or in the office or in the boardroom. They're relevant everywhere. I love how one of the terms you talked about when we first met, and you mentioned it again earlier, as did I in the intro, was eating the same dirt. I think that's a big part of the creation of that unit before we enter the battlefield. Talk to us where that term came from. Is it yours? Is it ancient? What do you mean by it?
So to chew the same dirt, which for a soldier, there's a literal aspect to it, right? You're in a trench with your fire team partner. It is everywhere. In the corporate world, it's really metaphorical. I heard it. It was a Clint Eastwood movie, Heartbreak Ridge, where he plays a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant just before the invasion of Grenada. And he talks about it. I'm pretty sure he's referencing his, Vietnam comrades where they chewed the same dirt. So, I picked that up. It's actually the title of my team resilience keynote and workshop. And so, when a group has when a group has a common experience, the more uncommon and harder, the better.
Mm-hmm.
As long as that struggle is somewhat equitable, that really does forge the bonds of human connection.
I
My
love it.
my
It's so
experience in the
brilliant. And
Army.
it's so contrary to taking it easy and making life simple. And there's definitely a time for that. And I think it's the recovery time that is for that. But for growth to be possible, especially in the face of so many incredible changes taking place in our world, we got to hunker down, do some reps, and be prepared for struggle together. So now when you work with, you work with people that range from veterans to homemakers to doctors and business leaders. What happens to people from different skills and different backgrounds when they endure challenge together? What are some of the transformations you've seen, and how is that useful right now in this moment in history?
Well, in fact, this past summer, I ran an experiment. I called that the paddle for resilience. So it was 1,000 kilometers, 5 weeks. 3 of us did it all. My business partner, Sean, he was the eldest at 63, and his 18-year-old son, Will, who was the youngest. And frankly, Will was the hero of the story. But we were joined typically for a week at a time by different paddlers from all walks of life. And it really was meant to demonstrate that resilience, both personally and from a team perspective, can be taught, practiced, and then forged in adversity. And that paddle took a physical, I would say, cognitive toll on me, not so much emotional, but I was in quite a bit of pain. I had some nerve pain going on. And so I had to fight through day after day, because we were on the water 10 to 12 hours a day, day after day for 5 weeks.
Wow.
We did take, every seventh day we would typically take a break, because recovery is important. Something I want to come back to.
Yeah, I'll make sure we come back to it.
But we purposely picked folks who we knew could do it, but who weren't. Not everyone was an Army vet, right? Not everyone was a super athlete, and so we wanted to ensure we could tell the story that if we deliberately apply the concepts and principles of resilience at both the individual and team level, and again, those are some of it scales, but some of it's unique, that we can do hard things together. And we finished. In fact, I said we'd be at the finish line between 11 and 11:30 on a Saturday, and we were there at 11:15
Wow.
because we planned it.
Yes.
We planned it extensively. There was tremendous preparations that went into it, and we ensured that the training was there and that everyone, although we were not equal paddlers, we were not equal backcountry, adventurers, but within the team use the strengths and weaknesses. And some people will just be stronger overall. You know what? They just need to pull a bit more weight, and that's okay. Because in the end, we finished together, and we
And
finished.
everybody probably moved the needle in
Yes,
their own way at their own level of what they thought they were capable of because of that. Now they're all starting from a higher foundation for the next thing that they face. That's remarkable work. That is awesome. What what are some of the core components? Recovery might be one of them. Let's make sure that gets into this section. What are some of the core components that you teach to help people struggle well and move the needle so that we avoid suffering? Like we do the rep without blowing the muscle. Yeah.
right. So I break it down into I break it down into three phases. So what you would do before, during, and after, an adverse event or a crisis or
Hmm.
periods of prolonged stress. Because not everything is the building is burning, right? Sometimes adversity is longer term. So the preparation is about doing hard things. So it's that inoculation. And then it's the higher the risk of what you're doing, the more you need to prepare for it.
Okay. Makes sense.
Some things you can wing, but some things require 5 rehearsals. So when I do a keynote, I rehearse 5 times before I get on that stage and speak for an hour, as an example. On the paddle, that was all about hydration, nutrition. Did we have redundancy in our navigation systems and our communication? So a lot of it is also building the systems so they're in place. So routines can take over. You can do the easy things easily,
Mm-hmm.
which frees up awareness and resources to deal with the variables, to deal with the crisis, to deal with what we'd say the alligators closest to the boat. So that's preparation, which really involves putting in the reps, doing all the boring stuff to ensure that you're prepared, and having those plans
And
that have.
thinking it all through in advance, like to detail, I'm sure, an insane level of detail.
We approach the paddle like a military operation, but we were teaching a bunch of civilians how to do that as well because it was high risk based on how rugged certainly the first 400 kilometers were. The extraction in most of that would have required a search and rescue helicopter.
Wow. Yeah. No, you got to be prepared for something like that.
Way to
Big
be
time.
prepared for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so preparation moves you into performance. And so how do you deal with things in the moment? And crisis could be your baby is crying,
Mm-hmm.
right? Crisis it's not always the building is on fire, right? Or there's a cyber attack. And that could be very personal in terms of what makes you anxious. And so here, controlled breathing, which is all linked physiologically to the limbic system. So the emotional part of the brain. And so if you can get through that emotional response, Frankel talks about if you can pause between stimulus and response to allow that to ebb and then flow, and then the prefrontal cortex can take over and you can think through it.
Yes.
But this is where emotional intelligence more important than IQ from a resilience perspective, because that's what gets you through the shock of whatever that crisis is.
Sure. Big or small, we still have an emotional response that if we can put the pause there and let not the right brain, the effective part of the brain come online, then we can face that. So, and that was performance. And then we have
Recovery.
recovery. Here we go. It's going to be easy for us to talk about because I think it's so critical and you've probably got a lot to share on that piece. I mean, you've done some of the hardest kinds of recovery in what you've done. So talk to us about that phase.
So recovery is 1/3 of the resilience equation, and yet many people don't give it the same level of intentionality or effort, to their detriment. I've heard it said recovery is not the reward for hard work. It's what allows you to do hard and even harder things over and over again. Or amateurs treat recovery as just something you're going to sleep into,
It's a nice too. Yeah.
nice
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
as opposed to professionals who program it. So, I take my recovery very seriously, and it really does start with sleep. And there's a science to sleep in getting your 7 to 9 hours. There's that expression, you can sleep when you're dead. Well, it should actually be if you skip your sleep, you'll die young.
Hmm.
The science is very clear. And it's not just because it leads to negative long-term health outcomes, but it is fundamentally tied to emotional well-being, but also performance.
Cognitive and physical
Yes.
performance.
Yeah.
100%.
All of that. So the top tip really for all things resilience is sleep.
I love that because we talked very frequently on this podcast, both to sleep experts, but also performance experts, that sleep is really the highest form of recovery. It is the thing that checks all of the boxes, whether it's the 8 hours or 9 hours you get at night, or sometimes even the nap that you can pick up during the day as a reset for yourself. Other than sleep, what's another form of recovery that you guys relied on in the paddle?
Gratitude. And you can be grateful. So some people are naturally grateful, but it also can be practiced. And so that's helpful for yourself, but also certainly within the team context, is just saying thank you. Now, typically, we would do that not only at the end of the day or if someone filled up the water or got the fire started or, helped you out with whatever, but also we would want to do debriefs and after action reviews. And I would say gratitude needs to be woven into that practice as well. So you're learning the technical stuff and the tactical stuff, and then from a human perspective, you're learning about each other, and you're just really appreciating each other for what they bring to the team.
Yeah, no kidding. And just as important in the field, I would say that's something that gets dropped pretty quickly in an office these days. And I'm not saying that I feel that on my team, but I know that the pace of demands and what it is you want to do to please people can often mean that those closest to you don't necessarily get that feedback that could give them recovery as well as you. So I love the idea of intentionally weaving it into the day or weaving it into the after action review, as you call it. That could be a very powerful way to offer recovery in the office world, in the corporate world, and even in the home, right? Even in the family network. I want to talk a little bit about adults versus young people, and adults, you can call that whatever age group you like. Maybe it's the working person, or it's the family person, or the couple. But why do you think adults need controlled adversity just as much or maybe even more than young people? I think there's chapters of life where adversity is playing a different role. It's certainly doing something to create that young person's framework, but what's it doing for the mature person who already has a framework?
Well, do they?
Ah,
Or,
touche.
I think many people just sort of stumble into various aspects of their life. I've been blessed in the sense that my military experience has taught me many things, certainly around preparation, certainly around goal setting. And then because of that preparation, how we can actually achieve that goal and what it takes to get there. And I am a much more, or I have more endurance now, as in my 50s than I did in my 20s.
Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? That's fantastic.
Well, because it's what's going on here, but I'd say, but emotionally as well. So I think resilience is needed across the board from a generational or an age perspective. Controlled environments, like this is where it's hard to have a controlled environment unless you purposely design it as such. And this is where I think military backgrounds or backcountry backgrounds or even athletics where you have a game to play, and so there's certain rules you're going to go and you're going to test yourself within that. It's still it's an environment, but it's not the real world, right? So it's a controlled environment, as put in the question. I think more people need to do it. More people just need to go out, set a goal for themselves, whatever that is. You have to do hard things, but start wherever you're at and then, slowly build up to it. The best thing to do is to find a community.
And I think gyms are some of the most fantastic places for community. Tell us a little bit about that workshop and tell us about that community and what's possible there.
So it's in the neighborhood. I live in Ottawa. It's called Powerhouse, and it's run by a wonderful woman named Sylvia. And she's created a great community there. And so we've collaborated a couple of times, and she's brought other experts in to speak to the community at the gym. And we talked about resilience. And I didn't focus on physical resilience because, we were at a gym and, people are looking after that.
Presumably they've got that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to a reasonable extent. So it was more about the mental, emotional, spiritual legs. And then there was a lot interwoven with the social network or relationship part of so the tabletop in my analogy. And I told him some stories from my time in Kandahar. I really used the paddle for resilience because that was a purpose-built experiment around resilience. And so that was the story element to it. And then many of the things we talked about were the conceptual pillars, right, or the theory. And then people had a chance to workshop that and to break out into small groups and talk about what their struggles are. And, for many folks, they've got young kids. And I think about, certainly my greatest leadership challenge were my two daughters. And, there were days where I, yearned for the simplicity of a gunfight as opposed to, the emotional
Wow.
chaos
Yeah.
of raising teenage kids, although most of that fell to my wife because I was often deployed.
Right.
And so resilience will look different for each and every one of us. We all have our own baggage, background, context, realities. But after listening to the check-in when everyone talked about what they want to get out of the workshop, you also realize that many of us have similar issues
Yes.
and similar struggles. And, if we're kind to ourselves and kind to each other and we're willing to help out as a community does,
Yes.
then really you can learn to struggle well together.
Yeah.
Incredible things happen when that occurs.
You're 100% right. And I think the answer to my question about adults finding an opportunity to challenge themselves and face adversity is get out of your house, find that place in your community where you can have those conversations and be coached, because it is such a lighter lift when you're doing it with other people. All of a sudden, all of the barriers drop away and you have great amounts of support, but also intelligent ideas on how you can solve some of these things. You also run another program that fascinates me, and I have to get a group together to come and take you up on it one day. I started talking to people last week about this program, and I'm trying to get this group together to say yes, that we're going to come up and visit you to do Outside the Wire. Talk to us about Outside the Wire. Where did the concept come from? And what kinds of things, how does it work, and what do you witness with it?
Okay. So outside the wire is a military term when you leave the safety of a base, which is typically surrounded by barbed wire. Okay. So you've got inside the wire and then you go outside the wire into the Wild West, if you
No
will.
controlled environment.
Or Taliban, enemy territory.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really a metaphor for taking yourself out of your comfort zone. Although we take those people out of their comfort zones because, and this links back to, I think, your first question, because that's where the growth is. And now we do it in a controlled environment. So we don't take too many risks physically, although you could be riding around in an armored vehicle or a tank. Maybe you're doing live fire shooting, instructed by some special forces folks.
That sounds outside the box for a lot of people, but
It,
yeah.
it would be. Or you're sleeping in a tent, right? Some of these programs will go overnight. Some of them are just, a half day. But it's all about taking people out of their comfort zone into a military-inspired classroom. We're not turning anyone into a soldier in a day or two or three, however
There's a bit
long.
of theater to it
There's
that
some theater, for sure.
pulls you outside your normal, right? That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Well, even walking around in the dark without white light or any light, for many civilians is uncomfortable. And so we do that. And this is where my team, mostly combat veterans, sometimes we will, on one side, we will just observe, or we may mentor, we may coach, or we may take control and give instruction, either a more complicated part or if there's some physical danger involved, right? Like riding around in an armored vehicle, for example, or if people are doing live fire shooting. Like we have
Right.
very tight
Shared
control
risk. Yeah.
when that is occurring. So it's really about leadership and teams within a military inspired environment.
Hmm.
You would learn both through osmosis, seeing how we operate, but also very explicitly, we would teach you how we solve problems in the Army, which is
Hmm.
highly structured. And it's highly structured not because we're robots, but it's so we don't have to think about the structure and we can put all of our efforts into the content
Yes.
that goes into the vessel, whatever
Yes.
that heading is.
Yes.
Right. So that discipline equals freedom, I think, to quote Jocko Willink.
The best. Yeah.
So there's a planning and execution element to it. There's certainly a leadership element to it. And really, the physicality is doable for the average corporate demographic, right?
Great.
We just need to get you to 80% max heart rate, whatever that looks like for you.
For you.
Then
Right.
you can then practice some breathing to calm the mind and the body. So then you could focus on a cognitive puzzle to solve. All
Marvelous.
the while, the emotions are playing out within the team dynamic. And that's usually where the greatest benefits and advancements are. And people have told me, you've seen us for a day now and a night in the field. You have nailed our team dynamics
My
because
gosh.
just a little bit of stress, it comes out. So that's the outside the wire program. And if you're a defense company, you get the added bonus of developing some empathy for the end user of your product or service. And we even allow you to deploy the gear that you build and we'll integrate it into the exercise. So, very interesting. We've gotten great feedback. Where it becomes difficult is some people are scared. They don't want either the risk or the perceived risk of doing something like that. And then there's time, because if you can spend more time with me, the better.
Hmm.
Because we can really get deep on some things, but I understand that some folks only have half a day. And then obviously, if we're going to roll tanks and do live fire shooting, um, and all the logistics of a tented camp, there's a financial
Of course.
aspect of it. Yeah,
Rightly so. And I like what I hear too, in that I believe you're an engineer. Yes, this is
I
your
am.
professional background. As an engineer, you have a protocol for problem solving that takes away the need for the team to negotiate how to solve the problem because you prescribe that. And that allows the focus to be on the solving of the problem and the revelation of how the team actually functions. I think that's genius. I think that's like a really incredible recipe for giving people clarity on how to work together. Marvelous stuff that you're working on. I have one closing question that's maybe
Sure.
on the lighter side of things, but heck, we might find ourselves back in the field the way you answer this question. It's what I call the moment of bliss question. So when you look at your day, having been through everything that you've been through, which is remarkable, and it might be a moment that you miss. Maybe you don't even see it anymore, but this is the moment that in your day you either look for or you notice that just causes everything to be very clear and maybe even is a little bit like that breathing exercise that gives you nervous system regulation. Mark Gasparotto, what's your moment of bliss?
So I was nearly killed 6 times in Kandahar. And so now my active daily gratitude is to say good morning to the sun. And so when I see that sunrise, like it's the most beautiful thing, because you have another day,
You have another
right,
day.
to make the most of. That's my moment of bliss.
Oh my gosh, keep making the most of those days. We need people like you to help people like us. Be better people, handle struggle, be able to work together. We have a lot of problems in this world we all need to solve, and a lot of things coming at us all the time. Thank you so much for showing us that shared hardship is the ultimate bonding agent. I hope you have the most wonderful day, and I look forward to working with you again. Thank you so much, Mark.
Jillian, my pleasure.